afternoon. Happy Monday. Welcome to our webinar on the state of the nonprofit sector in Santa Barbara County. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Miley Schoonover. I am the community manager for the Nonprofit Resource Network. We're really excited to have you all here with us for today's presentation. Thanks for joining us first thing on a Monday. We really appreciate that. Before we officially get started, folks are still trickling in, so I'm just going to go ahead and cover a few housekeeping items. So this recording is in session. It's going to be shared with all of our NPRN members, so please just be aware of that. If you have colleagues that can't be here today, please let them know to be on the lookout for this recording, and just be mindful that, if you're wanting to ask a question later in the session, that it's going to be recorded. If you would prefer to ask that in the chat, you're welcome to do that as well. Remember to keep yourself muted, and we're going to be using the raise hand functionality later on so that we can engage with our presenters later in the session. So we will have a dedicated time for Q&A, but if you have questions that arise during the presentation, feel free to ask any of them throughout the session. Go ahead and type them into the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. So we'll be monitoring the Q&A, and if there's any that we can address right then and there, we will do so. And we're going to save any kind of broader questions for our Q&A session, and we'll ask them aloud. Or you can use the raise hand functionality if you would prefer to ask your question aloud to the group. And just as a heads up for folks, we won't be sending out the slide deck, but again, the presentation will be available as a recording because we're going to encourage folks to take a look at the full State of the Nonprofit Sector report. So yeah, at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Gary Clark. He's one of our NPRN program co-chairs. He's going to say a few words and introduce our presenters. So take it away, Gary.
Thank you, Miley. So first and foremost, I want to acknowledge that today is Yom Kippur, and in our haste and our excitement to get this webinar scheduled, because the report's been a lot of hard work, we unfortunately neglected to really look at calendars carefully. And so we do apologize to our friends in the Jewish community for hosting this on Yom Kippur. And so we do apologize, and we commit to doing better. Next, I would like to thank two groups of people. Two of them you see on screen, and that's Natalie and Tarek, for all of their hard work and diligence in producing this report. So thank you both very much for being here and sharing your expertise. And the second group is actually all of the nonprofits and the leaders who shared their voices through both the Nonprofit Leader Survey as well as the focus groups, because the intention of this report is really to lift up your voices, to get clear on exactly what the needs are for our sector. And so we just really, really appreciate you all for supplying the necessary research or the data for the researchers to do their great work. So thank you very, very much for that. And yeah, I think with that, I will stop chewing up precious time and turn it over to Tarek and Natalie. Thank you both.
That's great. Thank you, Gary. And thank you, everyone who are joining us today. Good afternoon. We're really excited to be here and to share the results of the report. And again, today is meant to be an overview. There'll be a lot of additional detail in the actual report itself as we move forward. And we're going to just share our screen right now. So thank you. Okay. If we can go to the next slide, that'd be great. So before we get started, we do want to acknowledge all the people that contributed to this effort. This was many, many months in the making, and really without the help and support of the Santa Barbara Foundation, working with Gary, working with Stacy to really push us through, answer questions, get us working together to really answer the most critical questions that have emerged. And we just want to acknowledge the help that they provided, and the guidance and the support, both financial and emotional and mental in many respects. Data Lake was a great nonprofit research institute run by John Dunford. He provided a lot of the IRS data that we'll be sharing. What was great about that, which we'll talk later on is that it provided us with a real set of a more comprehensive sense of the state of the nonprofits, not just those that responded to the survey, but also what was submitted to the IRS, and so provided a bit more information in detail. And again, also we wanted to thank the School of Leadership and Educational Sciences at University of San Diego. This is the project that they did the previous year, and they worked collaboratively with us this year to really make sure that we were kind of keeping it focused on the same things and really helped support us. And then finally, I just want to thank the staff and people I work with at the Center for Evaluation Assessment at UCSB. It's in the Gewurz School of Education. Natalie Jones took on this project and really directed it, led it. It really did an amazing job, and you'll see the results of that today. Piper Targos worked to help with the data visualization. Caitlin Ng was our graduate student research assistant on it, and was really a huge contributing person to this whole thing. And I couldn't have done this, couldn't have been done without like this whole group effort. So, and then if we can go to the next slide, please. And of course, we want to acknowledge, as Gary said, those that responded to the survey. There's absolutely no way we could have done this without the engagement of the nonprofit community. And it's really critical for us to hear their perspective and hopefully share some of the concerns and issues that have come up in an authentic way. I do want to make and I'm going to bring this up in a couple of times throughout the presentation, but how important it is to complete the survey, because we are really trying to represent as best as possible. And I know there's no such thing as perfection, but as best as possible, the main issues and concerns that emerge. And there were some voices in this that were underrepresented, and we're going to acknowledge that, but with the hope and the idea that in the future efforts, that they would engage in this effort so that we can really be as accurate as possible. And again, the goal of this is for learning and development. Without an awareness of what are some of the main issues, there may be a lot of different voices and a lot of different priorities and concerns, but at least this provides some systematic effort to enable us to see what changes happen over time and what issues are emerging. So I just, again, wanted to acknowledge that. And also another pitch that the report is posted online. I don't know if we wanted to share the link at the end. I think we said towards the end. So, but it is posted and as part of it. So next slide, please. Just again, my role is just to provide kind of this broad overview. And one of the things that we're really proud of is the data that kind of was used to inform this report. As I said, we used IRS data, like the general business files. We had information on the IRS Form 990 and 990EZ that provide information on like location, size, and it was relatively comprehensive. We had data from the Labor Market Information Division as part of the California Economic Development Department. And then, of course, we did the survey that hopefully most, if not all of you, responded to, that's going to be presented here. And then finally, there were focus groups that were conducted with nonprofit workforce focus groups. The idea there is that we also wanted to hear from the nonprofit sector, not just provide a survey to kind of provide a more qualitative understanding of what's happening within the sector. So all these different data sources are compiled and are used throughout this report. And to give you an overview of the respondents and the sectors that were presented, you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we had about 160 nonprofits that responded to us. This is, let me just put up the annotation slide real quickly. As you can see, the majority of them came from the human service sector. So approximately 41% were from human service sector. There were nonprofits that focused on health. These did not include hospitals as part of it. And then again, one of the other areas is definitely arts and culture. A couple of things around the sources of the data is there were some overrepresentation. So human services were overrepresented in our sample. Religious nonprofits were underrepresented in comparison to the actually number of registered nonprofits in the community itself. If we can go to the next slide, please. And this is why it's important for us to, and I would encourage you and within your network to encourage people to respond to the survey. What you're seeing here is the distribution of the size of the various nonprofits based on kind of the financial structure that they, or the financial amount that they work within. So the majority of our respondents were nonprofits that were between 1 million and 5 million in terms of their size. And what you have, so this is what we call the number of this based on the number of people that actually responded to our survey. But we also had the IRS information on the size of the nonprofits here. And just to contrast, what we're trying to show you is how representative was our sample. And as you can see here, we had a large representation of nonprofits that were between 1 million and 5 million. However, if you look here, the number of nonprofits that were 50,000 or less was 26%. And the number of nonprofits that responded to our survey that were 50,000 or less was only 7%. And so this is an area where we underrepresented those smaller nonprofits as part of this process. So just to kind of give you an overview of who responded to us. If we can go to the next slide, please. We did a lot better on the survey. This is basically in accessing nonprofits from different regions within Santa Barbara County. So the gray represents the IRS data and the blue represents the data from our survey. And as you can see, we had a pretty good representation across based on the actual distribution of the nonprofit headquarters between North, Mid, and South County. So we felt like that was actually pretty good from a representation standpoint in terms of the location of the nonprofit and those who responded to the survey versus who's actually out there. Next slide, please. Okay, so actually, can you do both of them? I know it's a double. So this was something that we were really excited about. One of the issues that came up, or concerns that came up in the last survey that was done in 2021, was kind of the distribution of services, not just the headquarters of the nonprofits. And so one of the things that we developed in the survey is we actually asked nonprofit leaders to click on the area where they physically provided services. Now they can click on more than one location. We just wanted to understand the distribution of the services within Santa Barbara County. And as you can see here, and I don't know if it's going to be a big surprise to a lot of people, but the red represents like a high concentration of where the services are provided. The orange is lesser, and then it kind of goes from basically red here to all the way to blue, meaning very little or no services. And as you can see, the majority of services are definitely provided in South County, Santa Barbara, you have Goleta, and then also Santa Maria as part of that process. And then here are the actual percentages that are associated with it on this side of it. And so you can kind of see the top 3 areas where services are physically provided within Santa Barbara County include Santa Barbara, Goleta, Santa Maria, and then Carpinteria. And I know this is something that has come up in a lot of different conversations, which is what is the spread of resources between North County, Mid County, and South County. And this is something that we hope that would generate discussion and further conversations around that. So now I'm going to hand it over to Natalie to kind of go into the actual data and what that looked like. Thank you very much, Tarek.
So while the full report contains a wealth of information spanning 92 pages, what we're eager to offer you today is a sneak peek into some of those data and findings, since we're not going to overwhelm you with everything, but we definitely want to use this as a plug for the full report, and we'll give you that link at the end of the session. So these strategic blue highlights are going to serve as our roadmap today. So guiding us through the sections that we're going to touch on. As you can see, we're not going to touch on every section. But again, really want to encourage you to dig into those details and read the full report. So without much further ado, let's dive into some of these highlighted findings. So one of our first sections looks at the nonprofit sector employment. So in 2021, Santa Barbara County's nonprofit sector employed more than 15,000 individuals, constituting about 7.5% of the local workforce. So this section in the report really delves into the areas including employment trends, wages, hiring challenges, retention issues, the experiences of nonprofit workers throughout the county, and also happens to be the largest section of our report. So let's take a look at some of those findings right now. So a key finding from the data really revolves around the employment challenges that nonprofits are encountering, particularly in the areas of hiring and retaining talent. So of the Santa Barbara County nonprofit leaders that were surveyed, 81% reported hiring new staff in the last 12 months, while 73% said that they have had staff leave their organization or their staff turnover. And 56% of those leaders said that they currently, or well, they did have job vacancies. So in this same vein, we really wanted to explore these difficulties that we were seeing in hiring and in retention. So as you can see here, 77% through here of leaders reported having difficulty in hiring qualified employees. Where on this other side, we're looking at retention. And only 40% here said that their organization had difficulty retaining staff. So a little bit more detail on this. For organizations that reported that they had job vacancies, so about 81 leaders, so 80% of those said that it was difficult to hire qualified employees, while only 31% said that it was difficult to retain qualified employees. So for us, this really suggested that hiring qualified employees was presenting more challenges than retention of qualified employees. So we also kind of dug into this even more so, of course. So leaders who reported challenges in hiring were asked about the factors that were impacting their organization's ability to recruit staff. So the most common challenges that were cited were providing things such as you can see here, a competitive salary, with 78% of the leaders reporting that this was a challenge in hiring. Also, you can see here the ability to secure local housing was also presented as a challenge with 53%. Policies or competitive benefit packages and policies related to remote and hybrid work were also presented as challenges. And, of course, you can see COVID-19 and applicants need to pay off their student debt. So I'm going to present a quote here from one of the leaders who says, "Funding for operating expenses continued to be a challenge, and we need to invest in the staff to invest in our programs. We also utilize independent contractors. Trying to find ways to incentivize these independent contractors to work with us can also be a challenge." So now we're going to look at a little bit of the flip side here. In addition to discussing their hiring challenges, leaders who reported difficulties in staff retention were also asked about those factors that are impacting their organization's ability to retain employees. So as you can see here on this graph, most often leaders cited challenges such as high cost of living, 83%, right, of those, offering competitive salaries, 72% on there, and preventing employee burnout as the significant factors in retention. We're going to get into the employee burnout a little bit later, but wanted to bring that up as something that's very specific that we're seeing. Also, as you can see on here, 44% an inability to offer competitive benefits, 20% saying that their employees' inability to secure adequate child care, and then of course policies related to hybrid and remote work. And as this quote really exemplifies, as a nonprofit that provides services on a sliding scale, we are unable to sufficiently compensate employees because it would require an increase in the cost of services to the community. Therefore, we can't retain folks as we would like. Now, nonprofit leaders and frontline workforce members were asked to identify the most workforce retention issues. And so both groups highlighted several common concerns, as you can see here in this Venn diagram. Both leaders and frontline employees expressed concerns encompassing the high cost of living, employee burnout, policies, regarding remote or hybrid work, and the disparity between expectations and the reality of nonprofit work. Nonprofit leaders, as you can see here, also emphasize the challenge of applicants burdened by student debt, anxiety around contacting COVID-19 that we've discussed before, and policies related to the pandemic. while nonprofit employees specifically underscore the importance of professional development opportunities within their organization. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, 56% of nonprofit leaders said that they currently had a job vacancy. So of those reported leaders that had job vacancies, 83%, as you can see on here, reported that it negatively affected their ability to deliver services. Although, of course, as you can see on this, to a varying degrees, right? With 14% saying that it affected them to a very great extent, 31% to a great extent, and with most by far saying that it was to some extent affecting their ability to deliver services. In addition to this, we also wanted to understand the impact of these vacancies and, of course, other topics on the frontline nonprofit workers. So as we've mentioned several times before, to accomplish this, we held focus groups with nonprofit frontline workers who shared their experiences with us. And we'd like to share a little bit about this now. So among the questions that we asked frontline nonprofit workers was, what has the impact of nonprofit workforce vacancies been on your organization? So the most prevalent impacts focus group participants mentioned were things such as delays in getting the work done. So as you can see here, it just takes longer to get everything done because there just aren't enough people. It's kind of centralized where it's like events and graphic design and things like that, where the turnaround should be quicker. They're the ones that are really feeling the burnout and feeling overwhelmed. Another theme that was very prevalent came up was lack of capacity. People are just totally maxed out, way beyond 100%. Programs just aren't as good as you would like them to be. You can't deliver as much, and you're hoping to because you're just trying to get it done. Another theme that emerged from this was leaving the organization or sector. People are just leaving the sector. They're looking to go to the for-profit sector because they're getting more time off or a little more flexibility. And then finally, employees feeling overextended. The work has to get done. Some things fall through the cracks, but at the end of the day, everyone's going to be working harder to pick up the people that are missing. So generally, respondents acknowledged that vacancies meant that they had to prioritize what really had to be done if certain tasks or services were falling through the cracks. So although respondents referred to burnout, they really emphasized the importance of pushing through since they knew that their team was relying upon them and because they were passionate about their work. So digging into this idea of burnout a little bit more, many leaders and nonprofit workers identified burnout as a significant challenge to retaining qualified staff. So leaders reported the ways in which burnout was manifesting in their organizations. And as you can see on here, while a minority 15% of leaders said that burnout was not applicable for their organizations, most of the leaders reported that burnout manifested through ways such as staffing shortages that left employees stretched too thin, 68% here. Mental health challenges, 45% here. Dissatisfaction with work-life balance. And as you can see, other things such as physical health challenges, lack of motivation, and others. So in this same vein, focus group discussions with nonprofit workers revealed the additional insights into how burnout was affecting them and their organizations. So participants really highlighted things such as feeling stretched too thin. We work 7 days a week. We don't take holidays. We don't take Christmas off and stuff like that. That makes it a lot more difficult. I'm taking a vacation for the first time in 3 years, but even then I can't actually take it all the way off because everything comes through me and it's kind of hard to unplug. Other areas where that were mentioned, dissatisfaction with work-life balance. There's just not enough breaks. When you're in a position like mine, where I'm handling a lot of different things at once, if I'm not there, then things don't happen, especially if there's not enough staffing or coverage to be able to accommodate you as you try to take time off. Another theme that came up was waning motivation and sense of purpose. As this comment says, it manifests as, what's the point of a nonprofit? Does it make sense to have a business and do some good work? And then finally, one of the main themes that came through was pushing through because of the mission. When you're passionate about something, you're going to want to make sure that even if you're kind of down, you're going to get up the next day. You're going to say, okay, it's a new day and I have to get this done. This person is depending upon me. And this really was a sentiment that we saw very often, with the idea of a nonprofit worker pushing through for the benefit of the nonprofit mission, despite challenges that arose with staffing and other challenges. But It's not all without hope. We also found that leaders surveys that nonprofits are responding to these challenges by things such as we can see here, increasing wages. 83% of leaders reported that they had increased wages, with an additional 10% saying that they expected to within the next 12 months. We can also see other actions such as, increased flexibility in remote work and increased benefits. Other actions that nonprofits are taking include things such as providing bonuses and shortening work weeks. As we can see here through this quote, even if we are offering a competitive salary in the marketplace, it cannot compare with the astronomical cost of housing. Younger staff tend to leave the area when they start their own families. We have 2 people that have just given notice for that reason. One is moving out of state and the other is moving south of Los Angeles. Several of our staff, including the executive director, have relocated to Ventura, but the commute is hugely impactful these days. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit from this and take us to our next section. I did mention that was our largest section, and it has the most information. But now we want to switch gears a little bit to the nonprofit boards and volunteers. So this section really offers an overview of the nonprofit boards and volunteer roles in Santa Barbara, including insights into subsectors and the vital support that volunteers provide to the county nonprofits. And I'm sure, as you all know very well, the nonprofit sector greatly depends upon the invaluable contributions of passionate volunteers and dedicated board members who are committed to bettering the community, and the diverse skills and expertise that they bring along with this that really help to advance the nonprofit's mission through their time and their skills. So let's take a quick look at this section and some of the highlights. So among the findings in this section, there was a very significant decline that took place. And we all probably kind of felt this, but it's nice to sometimes have some data towards this end that took place between 2019 and 2020, in that both the total number of volunteers and board members for nonprofit organizations, which is probably very likely contributed to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I'm going to show you some stats here. The number of volunteers dropped by over 25,000, representing a staggering 47% decrease in the number of volunteers. Similarly, the total number of board members also decreased by over 1,400 or 28%. But the interesting thing with all of this is, despite these declines, the number of nonprofits remain relatively consistent during this time. And kind of going towards that, another important finding that we're really highlighting from this section is really the importance of volunteers, right? So nonprofit leaders that were surveyed indicated that a substantial percentage of respondents, 84% to be very precise, reported actively engaging volunteers. So highlighting the essentialness of volunteers in Santa Barbara County's nonprofit sector, the majority of nonprofit leaders said that their volunteers were important to delivering their organization's mission, with 41%, as you can see on here, saying that they're absolutely essential, and 28% indicating that they're a very important role that they play. So a little bit more insight on this: organizational leaders who operated with an all-volunteer model, no paid employees, more frequently emphasized the significant importance or absolute necessity or essentialness of volunteers in fulfilling their organization's mission, as compared to counterparts who managed with organizations with paid staff. So just a little side note with that. Now, again, we're going to switch gears a little bit over so we can kind of touch on all the different, kind of chapters, so to speak, within this. And so this next chapter takes us to the diversity, equity, inclusion, and access section of the nonprofit report. And so workforce members and nonprofit leaders shed light on the pressing DEIA needs and challenges. They also showcased effective strategies employed by these organizations, such as diversifying leadership and staff, integrating equity into programs, and actively seeking community input to better address community needs. Additionally, in this section, there's also some pertinent demographic data related to DEIA within Santa Barbara County nonprofits, including an analysis of diverse population representation among leadership and board members. So let's get into that a little bit. Now, as you can see here, this figure displays a comparison between the leader responses and the demographics of Santa Barbara obtained from the 2020 census. So as you can see on here, the red indicates our survey responses and the gray indicates the Santa Barbara County residents as indicated by the US Census information. So the data presented in this figure shows that for leadership, white individuals hold higher percentages of leadership positions than their representation in the Santa Barbara County population, while Hispanic or Latin individuals are most notably underrepresented in comparison. Of course, please, there's much more breakdown that goes into this in the full report, including CEOs, board chairs, and board members, but just to touch on this a bit. But what we also asked nonprofit leaders was the actions that their organizations have taken to advance DEIA. And so as you can see here, the most common practices implemented by responding organizations were related to diversifying their board members and job candidates. And so you can see here, 72% said that they have taken implemented practice to increase diversity of board members, and an additional 18% haven't yet, but they plan to within the next year. And this kind of goes along correspondingly with this. While only 25% of the leaders stated that their organizations have provided specialized DEIA training to board members, 36 indicated that they plan to implement such trainings within the coming year. Additionally, a small number of leaders mentioned other practices that their organizations have implemented beyond these that are presented on the screen, including creating systems change and conducting DEI organizational assessments. Leaders also provided additional insight into barriers that they were experiencing with increasing diversity within their organizations. So most frequently mentioned challenges included the size and diversity of the applicant pool, staff capacity, and finding qualified and experienced candidates. So as you can see on here, 45% of the leader responses stated that the application pool size and lack of diversity in the applicant pool were barriers for them increasing diversity within their paid staff and boards. 15% of leaders' respondents conveyed that staff capacity and size were barriers in increasing diversity within their paid staff and board. And 14% of the leaders described that finding qualified and experienced staff were barriers in increasing diversity within their paid staff and board. So now again, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and take us to our next chapter, which is demand for services. So findings that we saw in this section are really about experiencing increased demand for services due to various factors: COVID-19 pandemic, inflation, housing concerns. So this really explores the drivers behind the changing demand for nonprofit services in Santa Barbara County, as well as the capacity of organizations to effectively deliver these services. Additionally, it examines the reported ability of nonprofits to meet increased demand for their services. So let's look at a few of these highlights. So when we asked about the factors that have led to changes in demand, leaders overwhelmingly cited the COVID-19 pandemic as a major driver for the increased demand for their organizations. As you can see here, most of the organizations reported that demand for their services have increased, 82%. And so we can see here comments such as factors that have led to the change include comments such as children lacked many services during COVID. More children delayed in their communication skills from COVID. We have seen an increase in calls to our center and have been the first point for contact for many parents with concerns about their child. Another comment here, demand has shifted from programs that we used to provide in person to participating in virtual programs. Not everyone has made the transition. Similarly, a few leaders who reported a decrease in their demand also attribute it to the COVID-19 pandemic. So kind of on both ends there. As you can see from this quote, due to the nature of programming, COVID had a huge impact on the types of programming and activities we could facilitate in a safe way. Next, we really looked at the nonprofit leaders that reported an increase in their demand for their organization's services. So many nonprofit leaders reported that their organizations are facing limitations in meeting the needs of the community. And as you can see here, only 12% of those respondents reported being able to fully meet the increased demand, while the majority, you can see here, 52%, have been able to address some of the highlighted demand. So as one leader commented, we also had a couple staff members who were trained and certified to provide programs leave the program due to the pandemic. We have not been able to replace those staff. So although demand for our services is up, we are unable to meet those demands. All right, time for us to switch gears a little bit again. Now that we've just sprinkled a tidbit of information with that, let's go on and move on to our next chapter, which of course is the financial health of the sector. So of course, Santa Barbara County nonprofits rely on contributions, grants, and as you all very well know, some form of funding to operate. However, the nonprofit sector has faced significant challenges in recent years, including those from COVID-19, right, and inflation. So this section of the report really reviews the financial health indicators, leaders' predictions of financial health over the next year, operating cash reserves, and fundraising efforts. And so we're going to jump to a few of the highlights, and we're going to also kind of play an oldie but goodie that we've mentioned previously in the report. So as you can see here in this table, the IRS data suggests that there's an imbalanced allocation of nonprofit resources and financial assets throughout the Santa Barbara County. So as you can see on here, South County has a greater number of nonprofits and more substantial assets per capita compared to North and Mid County. So for instance, there's one nonprofit for every 353 people in South County, while in North County has one nonprofit for every 1,300 individuals. Now, I really want to point out here, and as Tarek's pointed out earlier, while there is a higher concentration of nonprofits headquartered in the South County, the findings from our leader survey reveal that organizations also provide services in regions that are beyond their headquarters, of course, but we really were able to document that here. As you saw earlier that Tarek provided. So again, this is visualized in the heat map, which Tarek explained earlier, and provides a representation of the regions that are served by the participating organizations. And so you can see it's not completely, corresponding to the table on the left here. But next, we really wanted to go into the idea of the effects of inflation, right? So one of the facts or the data points that we're highlighting today with the financial health section are these reported effects of inflation on the local nonprofits. So as you can see here in the graph, inflation has impacted Santa Barbara County nonprofits in various ways. Specifically, 81%, as you can see here, of respondents stated that they had to raise prices for program-related expenses. 79% respondents stated that they had to raise prices for program-related, increase salaries to keep up with the cost of living for their employees. And you can see here, 47% experienced a decline in the value of their investments. Other respondents also indicated that they have experienced uncertainty in foundation funding and a lot of other things that they've experienced through this process. So leaders also provide us with some insight on this topic, and we really wanted to highlight their voices as well. The minimum wage increase has been a blessing for all workers, but it has also been an unfunded mandate since funders have not increased funding. In particular, the minimum wage increase has created significant salary compression in our organization. In addition, the high cost of living, and in particular, increasing housing costs, is severely impacting our ability to recruit and attract new talent. As another leader put, our goal is to get to a living wage for a full-time staff, but for some, that's a 35% pay increase. As another leader responded, we've already increased salaries twice this year for inflation and retention. Now, jumping us off to, okay, let's look at the organizational capacity and how these are being addressed within this. So this section, participating nonprofits identified distinct areas requiring capacity building. So among the top priorities are strategic planning, communication, public relations, leadership development, and further, really, nonprofit workforce members provided insights into capacity building needs, including the desire for enhanced access to qualified applicants, as we've seen that this is quite a theme throughout the entire report, and increased collaboration with other organizations. But let's really dig into some of these highlights. So as you can see from this graph, surveyed leaders most frequently identify strategic planning, 65%, public relations, communication public relations, 49%, and board governance or leadership development at 48 and 44% respectively, and DEIA training as their top 5 organizational capacity needs during the next 12 months. Of course, there are other needs that organizations are highlighting, such as program evaluation, which of course I love to hear that that's something that they're looking towards. Volunteer engagement and administration, collaborating with other organizations, and engaging advocacy and business modeling, financial literacy. We also asked nonprofit leaders about additional external factors that were significantly impacting their work. So I wanted to give a little intro to this graph before I present it. The graph represents the size of frequency of responses by leaders, with those that are larger circles, larger bubbles representing greater frequency of external factors highlighted by leaders. So we can see here, those that were most often described include funding. Next was recruitment, and then the impact of COVID-19 and the transition back to in-person work and access to physical spaces to provide services. Other factors mentioned by leaders included the cost of living, as we can see here, leadership, existing work culture, including toxic practices, time constraints, limitation in service provision, external decision-making, and retention. Leaders also express challenges that they've experienced in their funding their organizations, and specifically in their organizational capacity. So as we can see here, folks are not paid enough or compensated enough. Many employees are unable to stay within the organization, and those that make it work are constantly stressed financially. In general, it manifests in different ways, from anxiety, stress, poor performance, low morale, frustration, and resentment, inability to stay in the job, and having to move, and more. Another quote, people with comparable skill sets are looking for work in Santa Barbara County. They'll end up taking for-profit initiative work because how else are they going to pay for rent in the county? When I've been hiring for programs, I find it very difficult to pull people away from these other better paying positions that do comparable work. And then finally, it's essential to raise awareness among funders for unrestricted funding to assure organizational excellence, competent and responsible leadership, and efficient operation of nonprofits. Now I'm going to take us from this and take us to our last chapter in the report, which is wonderful adaptations and innovations. So in response to obviously evolving circumstances throughout the past couple of years, nonprofit leaders in Santa Barbara County demonstrated their agility by adjusting their organizational practice through collaboration, adaptation, and innovation. They've forged new partnerships, restructured their programs, fine-tuned staffing models, and harnessed technology to enhance their services and community impact. So this section of the report really offers an overview of these dynamic collaborations, adaptations, and innovations, along with specific examples shared by nonprofit leaders throughout the survey. So members of the nonprofit workforce expressed a range of pressing needs and issues within their organizations. And the most prominent theme that consistently emerged was funding, specifically the need for flexibility in funding. Participants also stressed that this flexibility would empower organizations to allocate funds to address specific needs within their own organizations. As you can see here, there's not a lot of trust that philanthropic organizations have for donating because they like what you do and trusting you to use that money how you see best. So just being more flexible in that money would be really great. Another critical and recurrent theme throughout the focus group's responses was the necessity for increased collaboration and communication between agencies. The response from nonprofit workforce members emphasized the significance of partnering with other nonprofits that share similar missions with the common goal of serving the community in a more impactful way, as we can see here through this quote. I feel like there are opportunities that would be great opportunities, but sort of not knowing how to grow and not knowing how to take on those bigger things. It's almost like we're growing too fast, and getting some insight from other nonprofits about manageable growth would be really, really helpful. Respondents also highlighted the potential for smaller nonprofits to learn from larger organizations through such collaborations. Participants explained that by fostering increased collaboration and communication between agencies, organizations can promote growth and improve relationships. As you can see here, the quote is, the ability to have better communication between local government and emergency response. I don't think that we're communicating well enough. And I think that the best way for me, because I've been here as long I have, is through relationships. And as we're going to see here in this next slide, 84% of our surveyed nonprofit leaders report that they actively participated in networks, coalitions, and collective impact initiatives. The majority of the respondents, as you can see here through this chart, reported being part of 6 or more. So 27% of our respondents. And then the next largest, as we can see, 23 respondents that 3 or more of these networks, coalitions, or collective impacts. Now, I'm going to show you a lot, but this is not expect for you to see it. Leaders also shared stories of how they have modified their organization's practice through collaboration, adaptation, and innovation. And among these stories, many leaders highlighted the importance of partnership and networking with numerous organizations, forming new collaborations to pool resources and knowledge. Now, while you can refer to the report for a deeper look, I just wanted to display this. We wanted to provide a sneak peek at this section, so hopefully to whet your appetite and encourage you to go look at the fuller report. And then with this, finally, I will go ahead and hand it back to Tarek to wrap us up.
Great. Thank you, Natalie. And I hope for those that are attending and watching this, that this just gives you a really overview, a brief overview of some of the information that we collected. And I do want to emphasize again, kind of a theme that I brought up in the beginning, the idea of kind of the potential use for this information, especially to help with funding opportunities, collaboration, strategic planning around the nonprofit sector as part of it. And we really hope to continue to do this work in the future. I did want to emphasize that you know, one of the critical pieces of this process is it can hopefully inform the community within, but also help inform the funding agencies around where are the needs behind it. So for example, you mentioned the importance of strategic planning as like a high priority within organizations, and there could be an effort to help support that within the different organizations. The other thing I did want to say again is I just wanted to again thank everyone for participating in the survey. Those that did, also encourage those that did not to please do so. And then finally, I just so that we give us time to answer questions. I just again want to just share my appreciation and thank for the team that did this, but also for the Santa Barbara Foundation for their continued support around this effort. And we hope to keep going with this in the future. And I know there's been a lot of requests for the link, so maybe we can post it now as we also answer questions so people can see it. So it should be hopefully in the chat menu soon, and it should be available on the Santa Barbara Foundation website. Okay, so now we have hands up, right, and questions. So I haven't used the webinar feature before, so how can I call on people? Do they post the question or do they raise their hands?
Yeah, for those of you that were just raising their hands, I think you've put them down now. Jennifer Smith, I think you were next. Did you want to pose a question? Let's see, we'll come back. We do have a question. Well, yeah, we do have a question in the Q&A, so I'll address that first.
Yeah.
An anonymous attendee has asked, I'm wondering how the service area information distinguished between having a physical presence for service versus any remote services.
Yeah, so that was something we struggled with. We weren't specific about we specifically in the question asked, do they physically provide a service in that area? Because one of the issues that came up from the previous study was that they said that they served all these communities. However, the service was defined as people come to them. So if someone needed a service, they would have to drive down to South County to receive it, just as an example. And we just wanted to get a sense of how many had actual staff or people or offices located, even if it's a van and were physically accessible to them. So we didn't really account for the remote service portion of it, just to kind of provide that level of clarity and information around it.
Okay. I'm seeing another question from Tammy. Why is there no slide about percentage decrease in donations across the nation? They're stating 33% down in the last year, and I believe that was partially addressed in your slides, but for at the local level. But do you want to touch on that, either Tarek or Natalie?
Yeah, I mean, this is just really a snapshot, a touch on the data. We have a lot more data, including the IRS data, which we really didn't present very much on. Today, we really wanted to give you the feel of the answers and responses that all of you have shared with us. So if you go to that link that's sent, you can really dig in there and see if you can find the information that you're interested in. But I think one of the things that we also talked about with Santa Barbara Foundation is that we're excited to get feedback on things that the community would like to know about as this moves forward. If there's additional things that you're interested in seeing, let us know. That's one of the big changes that took place from the previous report to this report, was that large section on the nonprofit workforce and all of those things that are being experienced. So that was as a result of feedback from the community.
Yeah, and one of the other feedbacks we did receive is more focus on the housing crisis and its effects on the nonprofit sector, and so that's something we hope to incorporate in the future survey, just to acknowledge that as a piece of it. I did have a question for Natalie that came up in the Q&A. They were talking about the different, because you dealt with the IRS data in depth. Someone noted that they did another study in partnership with UCLA, and they found that there's approximately 2,000 nonprofits, and our data showed 847. And I assumed it was because of the particular year that was.
It was that, but it was also the ones that are actually filing, as opposed to not filing. And so that's going to be a huge difference for us in that. And so that's kind of where we're gauging off of. We have lots of fine print throughout the report that kind of, keys us into this. And so we really tried to stick with some of those things that we felt were comparable, across different data sets.
Yeah, that's what I wrote, but I just wanted to confirm.
Okay.
Other questions?
Yeah, Gary, did you want to share some of the recommendations you were speaking to in the chat?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to lift up what Tarek said earlier, and that is that this research can be very, very helpful and informative, especially to funders. And so I do want to share that at the tail end of the report, on page 88 and 89, respectively, or no, actually the page numbers are 84 and 85, but as far as the PDF. Anyway, Santa Barbara Foundation has their list of recommendations as a result of this research. And I will just highlight the titles of them. There are 5 of them. The first is invest in the nonprofit workforce. Number 2 is increase nonprofit capacity in Mid and North Santa Barbara County. And then number 3 is prioritize flexible funding. Number 4 is codify diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. And then lastly, cultivate trust, collaboration, and innovation. And so I wanted to share those 5 recommendations. They're explained in detail in the back of the report on gold colored pages. So please keep an eye out for those.
I'm happy to screen share, Gary, if you like.
Oh, I don't know if that's necessary, but I just want to make sure folks know that they're there. And if they have any questions about them, feel free to reach out to me at the Santa Barbara Foundation.
Great, thanks, Gary. I think we have a few more questions in the Q&A. So we've got one that says, sorry if I missed this, but when and how will we get the final report? Oh, so that you can find that in the chat. We have dropped the link. And they also said, thank you for all of your efforts in documenting and sharing this valuable info. So thank you all. I will reshare that link in the chat. We have, let's see, thank you for the excellent work and presentation from Ted. Are there plans to share this information with elected officials, particularly about the cost of living and housing impacts on staff hiring and retention? Great question.
Yeah, so the report just came out, I think, today. So that's also, and this is our first effort to really begin the process of sharing and getting also feedback. And that I can echo what Natalie said and what Gary said. This is not, hopefully you don't view this as a one-way communication process, but we'd love the feedback on what areas might be of interest to you as an organization or to the community of nonprofits. And part of our effort is definitely to engage a broader community around the results.
And we are printing copies and are going to make sure that our elected officials have copies of them. So,
yeah.
Great. I just wanted to address a note from Stacy addressing Catherine's earlier question. So she says on page 9 of the report shows that SB County had 2,078 registered nonprofits in 2022. The lower 847 number has to do with how many filed taxes, as
thank you.
presenters mentioned.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
I just couldn't remember every single detail.
Yeah. All righty. Well, do we have any last burning questions from our attendees?
I have actually one more thing to share, and that is the cost of housing came up pretty regularly in this research. And so what I wanted to share is that the Santa Barbara Foundation is also working on another report about the role of philanthropy in housing affordability. And that report will be coming out later this fall. So I just want folks to be aware of that. It is mentioned at the back of this report where we have our SBF recommendations. So please stay keen to see an additional report that's very specifically targeted at housing affordability and the role philanthropy can play.
Great, thanks for that, Gary. Let's see, I think one other question. Oh, just some love from the Q&A. Again, thanks, Sydney. This is a phenomenal presentation and reinforced our challenges and the approaches we're taking to overcome some of these barriers. Thank you. Thank you all for joining. Unless we have any further questions, I can wait a second here. While I wait for any other burning questions, I'm just going to go ahead and reshare the link to the full report. So you all should see that in the chat. I think we've got one more. Oh, no, just some more thanks. Thank you all. And someone also said, looks forward to reading about donor stats. When will the recording be published? With this week. So within the next couple of days, I'm gonna trim some parts of the recording. Let's see. Oh, Cinder has raised her hand to speak. Cinder, the floor is yours. You can go ahead and unmute yourself if you want to chat.
Yeah, so you can hear me?
Yes,
So
we can hear you now.
While I was sitting here, I went to the Santa Barbara Foundation website and found the report. And when I clicked on the report, it says, whoops, that page can't be found. So I'm not sure why.
did you use the link that was in the chat? Because on the website, it's still a little, yeah, I had the same experience with the website, but the link should direct you to the report itself.
Oh, okay, thanks.
And if anybody's having trouble with the link, please email me and I'll make sure they get the correct link, and I'll double check to make sure our website is functioning properly.
Cool. Anything else, Cinder? Or
Yeah,
Nope.
if you Google it, it won't show up easily yet because it hasn't, the algorithm hasn't kicked it up yet. So that's what's happening.
well, and I'll be sure to share that out in the NPRN newsletter, of course, this week, and we'll surface that on our website as well, and yeah, link out to the SD Foundation's webpage. All right. Okay, well, if there's nothing else, I'm happy to let folks go on with their day. I just want to thank everybody who joined us today. We had a lot of interest in this topic, of course, and I just want to thank our presenters for all of the work that you have put into putting the report together, and for putting this presentation together, of course. Excited that we were able to kick off the launch of this report with this session with our members. So thank you all. Please be on the lookout for the recording later in your inbox this week, and share with those who weren't able to make it. And hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you,
you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Miley.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you, guys.